What is up, Saints fans? Chris Rosvoglou here with John Hendrix and Lance Moore. We got a special presentation for you guys as we break down and recap the 2023 draft class for the New Orleans Saints, kind of where it leads them, our thoughts on some of the big moves they made, and hopefully this positions them in a spot to be NFC South contenders. And if you guys have some questions along the way, we'll make sure to get them in the chat and answer them. And as always, guys, this program is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. Have you been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore? Scott McNair handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-111 for a free consultation. Yes, a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. So, Lance, John, how's everything going, guys? How was your weekend and just overall experience with this draft?
Well, I can't speak for Lance, but I'm still trying to recover. It's a couple long days out there at the facility, so it's a long process. But there from bell to bell, it was good. Saints treat us right out there too. It's a fun, lot of action and stuff. And when they trade up and all, it's like lightning. Hair on fire, lightning, all that stuff. It just gets crazy. But I'm getting better. I'm recovering.
Well, look, I can't say that I had the same experience. Obviously, I'm out here in Southern California with my family. I was not on full-time draft duty like I'm sure you guys were. But look, man, it's to me, it was a great draft for us, and not one that's going to make headlines as far as like the splashes that we made or the flashy name or the player that nobody thought that we would take. But one that I think was very, very productive, as I'm sure we'll get into tonight. But I'm excited, man. I think we did a really great job of the draft. And for me, it was kind of crazy dealing with kids' activities, the draft, and you've got NBA playoffs and NHL playoffs. I mean, it was just a crazy weekend. But shoot, man, I think a great weekend for the Who Dat Nation.
Yeah, absolutely. Lance mentioned the NBA playoffs. I was joking around earlier today talking about it's Friday night, day 2 finishes. I'm excited about the Saints picks. And then it's like 1 a.m. and I'm sitting there watching the Lakers-Grizzlies game. I'm like, what am I doing to myself? Just go get some sleep. But yeah, it was wild. And we'll get right into it. Talked about, Lance, you mentioned may not be the splashy, picks that they made in terms of, going all out on skill players, whatever positions that might make fans just, uber excited. But let's talk about the first pick that they made over there in Bryan Bresee, Clemson defensive lineman. Lance, just overall, what'd you kind of think about that pick going in that direction and adding a former 5-star recruit?
I think it was a need-based pick. I mean, obviously we've lost a lot of guys on the front defensively, and to be able to get a guy of his caliber late in the first round, I think is pretty impressive. I mean, he's a productive big guy. He's stout at the point of attack. He's somebody that Clemson, they moved inside and outside, which is a big-time need for our defense. And one thing that I think about this draft in general is versatility. We got a bunch of guys that I think are really, really versatile as far as what they do. They're not one-trick ponies. It's not a guy that they say, hey, you play the 3 technique and we're never going to change that at all. Like a lot of these guys are going to play multiple positions, which adds value to what they can bring to this team. But obviously, Bryan, I mean, he's a guy that's played in big-time games there at Clemson, and I don't think the spotlight will be too big for him. I think he's going to be potentially a day one starter in this defense, and that's kind of what we expect. Hopefully he has kind of similar trajectory as a Cam Jordan and maybe not Marcus Davenport. The jury is still out on Peyton Turner, right? But so you've got the outlier in Cam, so hopefully he tracks that way. But I'm excited to see him work. I'm excited to see him out there on the field. And, I think it wasn't a good selection to me. I think this was a great selection. It's not a splashy name, but one that I think is going to, will reap benefits from.
John, I have something for you on the same topic of Bryan Bresee. I'm curious. First off, love to hear your thoughts on the move in general of adding him, but I'm also curious, you kind of being around the building, how much of, this pick did it feel like this is exactly who they wanted at the spot and things just like fell out perfectly for the front office?
Yeah, I mean, love the pick too. He's who I had mocked for the Saints at 29, and I think a couple of other people did too. And look, I think when you look at the need right there, right, you had Mozzie Smith go, you had Clancy go, obviously from Pitt, and kind of the board starting to say, okay, this is the spot, and looking at the defensive tackles. But look, I think when you look at it, I know people are going to have jitters because there's some injury history, all this other stuff. And look, they're going to work through that. I don't think that's a real indicative of him and his trajectory or his outlook on the next level by any means. But I think what I look at it is you bringing in Todd Grantham, you defensive line coach now because Ryan Nielsen's out of the picture. You got a guy who you can use in a lot of different areas on the field, and he can play all of them. He brings intensity. He's somebody who can stop the run. He's somebody who can get after the quarterback. And some of the things that I think about last season where the Saints were really deficient on that defensive line is it's third and manageable, third and something. The Saints defense needs a big stop. They don't have anything coming from the interior. They were trying to get it from the edge. I mean, you have to bring linebackers like DeMario and Caden Ellis to get home to the quarterback. I think when a guy like Bresee, you can get him to push the pocket interior. I really like the pick. I think when you talk around the building, does check a lot of the boxes. We got to talk to a lot of them. Dabo Sweeney was really high on him, talking about a future Pro Bowl outlook as well. Look, I think, again, does the name leap out at you? No. Are people mad because they didn't take Nolan Smith? Yes, but again, it was the single most pressing need because at one point they had just one defensive tackle on the roster. Then they added 2 free agency, and then they re-signed Malcolm Roach. This made the most sense, and it was either going to be at 29 or 40. I like the player. I think he's going to come and bring it, and he has an amazing backstory with his sister Ella and all the brain cancer that she had to suffer and passed away. I mean, this guy has a lot to prove, and he plays for her. And I think when you talk about immeasurables and tangibles and stuff, that's a thing that's going to keep this guy motivated day one to whenever he hangs it up.
Yeah. And while we're, speaking of the draft and kind of just the overall haul for the Saints, if you guys, maybe it even is Bresee, but we'll start with John, then we'll make our way over to Lance. Is there a favorite pick you have in mind as of now? Whether it's the fit, maybe it's just the player and you're not so sure how the scheme will kind of fit in with that guy, but who's the prospect so far out of the Saints haul that you're really excited to see?
I mean, I'll just start. It's A.T. Perry for me. I'm partial to the wide receiver. I just cannot believe this guy fell as way he did. And he told us afterwards, he said there were some character issues that he didn't really understand that came up that caused him to kind of slide. But this is a guy that was a day 2 pick. Mel Kiper mocked him and around that 71 range to the Saints. That's the guy I had at 71 for the Saints. But this guy is a big body, possession style receiver. There's a few things I would say, just like he can run the route tree super, super well, and he can make the contested catches, high point the football, all the things you want from a big body guy. And we've talked about, Michael Thomas. We hope he's 100%, but you needed another weapon there. Brian Edwards is one, but getting A.T. Perry, I think this guy might end up being the steal of the draft. And for me, look, I'm glad he fell. I'm glad the Saints made the trade they did to get him. And I think having too many wide receivers on this team to battle out is not a bad thing.
Well, look, I mean, I agree with you, A.T. Perry. I mean, I'm obviously partial to the wide receivers, and I want to speak to what you were talking about with the character issues. Like, for me, I've never understood. I guess I'm new to the media, right? Like, I've only been in it a few years, but I've never understood the people that go out of their way to bash these players. And it usually happens late, like right before the draft. Something comes out, and there it is. They fall from a potential 3rd round pick to a 6th round pick, or Laramie Tunsil years and years ago, who was for sure the number 1 overall pick. Then he drops to 10 or 11 or wherever he dropped. Like, I've never understood what somebody is going to get out of that. Like, if the kid is not committing murder or doing something super illegal and stupid, then really, to me, why does it matter? And on the flip side, for a team's perspective, like, are you really gonna throw all of the work that you've done out of the window? That's the work that you've done for months and months on end, and sometimes years, right? Because they really start focusing in on these guys when they become draft eligible. So some of them are 3rd-year sophomores, others are 3rd-year juniors, right? Like, they're really, really doing work on these kids. And all of the work that you've done, you've gotten to know the player a little bit yourself through others, right? Because there's not a whole lot of communication between player and scout or player and coach. but you learn something about these guys. Then you turn on the tape and the tape doesn't lie, right? You can't hide on the eye in the sky, right? It's the tape is always on. So it just gets under my skin when I listen to the draft and you hear Mel Kiper or whoever say something about he's got a character issue or this and that or whatever. Like, we've all got character issues. Like, we've all had something that we've dealt with in our past that maybe we're ashamed of or we're embarrassed by. But at the end of the day, these kids, most of them aren't getting kicked off of their teams. And if it was something that was that bad, we would not see them playing college football either. So I just had to get that off my chest. It bothers me. It gets under my skin and it irks me when somebody says this guy's a little bit of a character issue player or something like that. Like, it just really, really bothers me, because it's like, okay, well, what exactly do you mean? What are you saying? What is it about this kid that makes you so unsure now when you were sure that he was a third-round pick before? He's got the talent, but what is the but? And who are you hearing these buts from? That bugs me. But to flip the script and not go too much into A.T. Perry, I really like Jordan Howden. I like his versatility. I like the fact that he can play safety. He can come down in the box. He can play nickel. He's played over 500 special teams plays as well. Like, he's a guy that I think is going to play. I mean, it doesn't matter where he got drafted. He fits the mold of a Saints safety, a tough guy, physical guy that can come down and tackle. He's not scared against the run. I'm not saying he's a day starter at nickel or safety, but I think he's a guy that's going to, just based off of the things that he can do, he's going to find his way onto the field one way or another, whether it's special teams and then potentially defense or vice versa. I mean, I like the pick. I love the value of where we got him. And I think he's going to be a guy that, he was coached by PJ Flex. So a guy that's going to really, really have him pro ready.
Yeah. And, since we were talking about A.T. Perry, I want to go back to something you said, Lance. It might have been a month or two ago. I remember we were all, chatting and we're talking about the wide receiving core for the Saints. And we're saying, do they have enough guys? Do they have enough of guys that do different things? Because we always kind of bring it back to maybe the 2009 receiving core, even the 2011 one. Now you add A.T. Perry to the mix with Michael Thomas, with Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, Bryan Edwards. Looking at it from your perspective, Lance, you feel like they have enough there at that group? Would you want to see them maybe add another piece or two? What do you kind of feel about that position unit?
Well, look, I mean, I don't want to lose track of all of the guys that we've got on the roster. I mean, obviously there are more guys on the roster, a Keith Kirkwood, a Traquan Smith, even a newly signed Bryan Edwards. I mean, guys that all three of those guys have played a lot of football over the last couple of years. So it's not like A.T. Perry is going to come in and he's instantly going to be the fourth guy. But I do think he adds some necessary size, which is something that we really don't have a lot of as far as height goes. I mean, he's a 6'4" receiver. He's long. He's a little bit lanky. Like, he's not a 6'4", 220 like Colston was, or 230, just big body like that. He's a more slender guy. But if you watch his tape, you really see him go up and attack the ball. He could be a potential red zone jump ball type guy or a deep threat jump ball guy. Not to say that the other guys can't do it, but that's just something else that he has that I think that we could potentially take advantage of. I like the player, but I don't think he's going to have to come in and be that guy right away. I think we've got some pretty good depth. Not necessarily with the biggest of names as you go down, the list on the depth chart, but I think we definitely have got more than capable guys at the position.
Yeah, and John, in order to bring A.T. Perry in and obviously continue on the thought of the receiving room in general, but to bring A.T. Perry in, part of the equation is Adam Troutman going out. So kind of thinking about that as a whole, one, what's your confidence level in the receiving room, but also on the Adam Troutman front, did this kind of seem like a surprise to you when this happened? Or do you feel like, man, it kind of makes a lot of sense on all fronts?
I don't know if I'd say surprise, because, talked to him in the locker room. I mean, he had a good relationship, obviously, with the media, and just a guy that was happy to do his role of what he was asked to do. But I mean, you look at it, the compensation to get back into the sixth round to take Perry. I mean, I think it's one of those things where you look at the tight end room. You made the contract extension for Jawan Johnson. I think this kind of puts Taysom Hill maybe a further into focus, because the Saints had kind of said before that, hey, they feel like they better know how to use him and deploy him going forward. So I'm interested to see how that works out. But then behind him, you know, you're looking at Lucas Kroll, some undrafted guys, Miller Forstall from Alabama. I think that's a position that they're going to look at free agency. And, you know, I asked Mickey about the free agent board, and they just said that, hey, they go into it, they got so many prospects that are rated on their board, and then after that, certain prospects, they start to look at kind of the free agent market and such. So look, you know, Troutman, you got to be a blocker in this league. You got to be able to catch footballs. I mean, tight end has to do all the dirty work, and then they're asked to do a lot more. And, you know, the Saints have had some great tight ends, Jimmy Graham that played with Lance Moore, obviously. So I just think that some of those guys that you get, some of the, that you look at, you have to be able to manage that. And then a guy like that, veteran that you trade away, I mean, you know, it's eye of the beholder. And when you look back, is Sean Payton going to know how to use Denver or use him in Denver? Absolutely. Is he going to be a good target for Russell Wilson? For sure. But, you know, Troutman had his moments to shine. And look, again, sometimes these guys just need a fresh scenery, right? I think, you know, you look at Dan Arnold as a prime case. He had that big play where he could have caught it in the end zone in the championship game, but the guy bounced back in his career, and he did some good work with the teams that he latched on. But, you know, look, as far as A.T. Perry, and look, I'm going to tee you up, Lance, but because I saw one of the comments or questions in here, some of the knock on Perry was that he had some drops and some problems there. Now, without stealing thunder, I think it's coachable. Cody Burns is somebody to get it right, but I'm going to toss it up to you and say, is that something that we should be concerned about?
Look, I'm a firm believer in that catching the football is a skill, right? We're not naturally born great pass catchers. Some of us are more natural at it than others, but since it's a skill, it is something that can be improved, right? And I don't know what the reason is for his drops, right? It could be lack of concentration. It could be maybe he's got a banged up finger. It could be, you know, a number of different things, but it is absolutely something that can be coached up. It can be repped. And people always ask me, what is the best drill to address drops or to improve your hands? And there is no magic drill. Honestly, there's no magic drill. There is not one single drill that I could say, do this and your hands will get better. What I always say is catch the football. I don't care who's throwing it. I don't care how hard, how many times, where it's coming from, but catching the football is the only way that you're going to continue to get better at catching the football. And I know that's going to be something that if we know it as media members, the coaches know it as well. And guess what? Other teams know it too. So it's going to be something that I'm sure they're going to harp on. They're going to make sure that he's catching tons and tons and tons of footballs. And yeah, like I said, it's a skill. So it can be improved. I don't think there should be concern for it today. You know, but I guess you kind of wait and see how it plays out through the offseason and then into the preseason. You know, unless it's clutch situations and he's dropping the ball, I wouldn't be too worried about it right now because there's other guys that are capable of making plays as well. So if that starts to rear its ugly head, we won't see much of him. We'll see more of somebody else.
Yeah, that's a good point. Before we start getting into some questions, so if anyone has any questions while watching the stream, feel free to drop in the chat. We will definitely get to those. I want to talk about another pick that was fascinating. Saints trading up to get Fresno State quarterback Jake Haener. Might have been a surprise to some people. For some, they may have loved the pick. I'm towards the latter. I'm one of those guys that when you look at Jake Haener, I think he's kind of a gamer. I'm concerned about the height, the durability, whatever it might be, but throws a great anticipation process as well. And I'm just a fan of taking day 3 quarterbacks as long as you have Derek Carr in the building, and maybe you could develop one while he's sitting there and holding down the fort, and you might get lucky. You know, we look at teams back then like the Cowboys taking Dak Prescott day 3, and that worked out pretty well for them. John, I'm curious, when that pick got made, what was your kind of thoughts on bringing Jake Haener into the building?
There's 3 guys that I got right in this mock draft. Bresee was one, A.T. Perry was the second, and Jake Haener was the other one. And so, look, I was never in favor. When they signed Derek Carr, I think I took Hendon Hooker off the table, any of that stuff. I just didn't believe it because there was more pressing needs. Like, why would you draft a backup quarterback that's going to sit for a few years when you need defensive tackles, you need all these other positions, right? And so, look, I mean, when you look at it, he was my favorite quarterback. I got to see him at the Senior Bowl, and perhaps what I admire most, besides the fact that he absolutely loves the Saints and loves Drew Brees, was childhood, you know, repping it on the West Coast, which is not easy when you're in 49ers and Raiders territory, but, you know, and Chargers, let me not forget about them too. But, you know, one of the things that was thrown at him at the Senior Bowl is that he worked with Ronald Curry, right? And in some of the Saints assistants. And he was given a playbook of about 75 to 80 plays that was straight out of the New Orleans playbook to learn it, right? And so that's pretty intimidating because the New Orleans offense is not exactly a super easy thing to learn, and let alone any NFL playbook. But, there's some complexities there that obviously New Orleans does and employs. But the fact that Haener did what he did and had a pretty good week of practice and a couple weeks of practice, and then obviously was a Senior Bowl MVP matters. I think when you look at him, the biggest NFL comparison that comes up is Taylor Heineke. Right. I think he has potential maybe in a couple of years to potentially be that guy. But you're looking at after this year, I mean, and Dennis Allen laid this out pretty clearly. It's Carr, it's Winston, and it's Haener, which I thought was pretty interesting. You put Haener as third right now. And I think that further speaks to maybe what they envision with Taysom Hill going forward and such. But, look, I think when you look at his outlook, he's paired up with another Fresno State guy. He's already has familiarity with Ronald Curry, which is going to help him and be a little bit ahead of the curve. So look, after maybe Jameis leaves this year potentially, or maybe if he gets straight into preseason or something, I think he could be a pretty serviceable backup that could potentially have some future here. But he's just going to have to sit, learn. He's going to have to be a little bit more consistent on some things, just learn the NFL and be a student of the game here. You're not having a pressure situation where you have to come in and be the gunslinger because you're going to start games, like your Bryce Youngs or your CJ Strouds and stuff. I think he's a good pick for this team. He was definitely my favorite day 3 quarterback, one I like the most, just all along when you look at this whole process. And I think that the Saints got a really good one here.
Yeah, Lance, what about you? I know it's easy for, to think back then. You got Drew Brees in the building, don't have to worry about what's going on. As long as he's running the show in his prime. What do you kind of think about the idea of bringing in a Jake Haener while you have Derek Carr at quarterback?
Well, I listened to the Saints post-draft coverage and just kind of listened to some of the things that they were saying over there. And I think Nick Underhill made a great point. Like, every couple of years, you need to draft a quarterback. You just have to. Like, you need to put yourself in position to potentially have the next guy. And that, I'm not saying you need to draft a quarterback in the first round every couple of years. Like, that's silly. That's not realistic. But to have a guy on your roster that can sit and develop and learn and then potentially have an opportunity, I think that's a smart thing. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to happen this season, but look at what happened in San Francisco last year with Brock Purdy. I mean, who would have thought that he would have ended up being the starting quarterback for the 49ers for most of the season and into the playoffs and balling out? I mean, like, he had the opportunity to do that because he was prepared, because he took the job seriously. I'm sure he learned from everybody in that building all season long. And Jake Haener, personality-wise, kind of rubs me similarly as far as his intent, as far as the way that he's going to work. And shoot, I mean, it's a really, really good situation to come into. Like, he's not going to be the backup. Like, Jameis Winston is the backup. So he's going to be able to put in the time and learn how to be a pro. And like you guys, kind of alluded to, like, he already knows this offense. Like, it's not brand new. He's not coming in this week to workouts and going into the meetings with his head spinning. Like, he's already run some of this stuff and run it well enough to be able to be the Senior Bowl MVP. So I like the pick. I think it's smart. I'm not saying that he's going to be Drew Brees, but I do think that this kid is very, very poised. He played a lot of ball at Fresno. He's a high completion percentage quarterback, I think 67 or 68%, which is big. Like, you got to be able to make the throws when you make it to the NFL. You can't just have gaudy numbers with a low completion percentage. I think those guys get in trouble because they think that they're going to be able to do the same thing in the NFL, and you just have to be able to make all the throws in the league. He's done that. So I like the pick. I think it's smart, and I think it's one that, if it doesn't work out, doesn't hurt us. And I think that is even more important than the fact that we've got somebody that we can develop.
You touched on something too, Lance. And sorry, Chris, not to steal your thunder just because it's there. Ian Book, when he was drafted, it was a year later that he said that he felt really comfortable with the playbook. That first year as a rookie, he really kind of struggled with that. And I think that's a huge learning curve. You look at his team's draft picks. I mean, I think Haener's easily the most exciting guy the Saints have drafted in this millennium. I've said that plenty. They had Garrett Grayson at one point. And, no knock against these guys. But, again, there's certain pressures on a quarterback when you get drafted. And, I think Haener's coming in a situation just having that leg up and already knowing some of the stuff, the basics, is really going to help him. Because I think when I talk to just rookies, I think back at JT Barrett and stuff, it's just those guys have to learn the playbook. That's the biggest thing, is the communication, the lingo, some of those things, just to be able to succeed on the next level.
Yeah. And if you watch Fresno State, just the way they coached him last year too, it seems like they put a lot on his shoulders and said, hey, we trust you to figure it out. And look, 9 straight wins when he came back from injury. He did a great job, 20 touchdowns, 3 picks. Great there. So let's get into some questions. This one I found interesting. John, I'll throw it to you. They're asking, do you think the Saints are done in free agency? We don't have to, we could get into whether or not they're into guys like Yannick in the free agency, but it doesn't even have to be specific names, whether it's maybe D-line help, linebacker, tight end. Do you think there's a move here for the Saints to be made post-draft free agency?
Absolutely, yeah. At least 2 positions. Linebackers definitely one of them, and then tight ends the second one for me. Just because, you look at trading Troutman, you got to replace that somehow. And if you're saying it's all going to be on undrafted guys, I don't really buy that. I'm not saying they can't and they're not capable, but, Foster Moreau is somebody that's very much still in play for this team. I don't know what that situation is like, but what I've heard on draft day is a lot of teams are still calling about him. So their interest is there for Foster Moreau. So I think that's one of them. Before they got Isaiah Foskey, Yannick Ngakoue was my guy. I think that's somebody that they could have got out and signed. But, look, now that they got him, Foskey, in the mix, maybe not somebody as high profile as a Ngakoue, maybe somebody else that can fit in the rotation, because, look, Cam's still there. Cam's going to do Cam's things. And then Carl Granderson, obviously, Tano is going to be a bigger part of the rotation. And then kind of Peyton Turner is this wild card, right? And so, look, I wasn't trying to throw shade when I said this, but Isaiah Foskey is very similar to the Davenports and the Peyton Turners, but he had production in college. He had the sacks. So that's, I think, when people were saying, oh, they just drafted another guy, because you look at them side by side, look at their RAS. Davenport and Foskey are almost identical, except Foskey had all those sacks. And he's going to have to learn a lot of things, but I think he's such an exciting player to watch and fits that Saints prototype and stuff. But to go back to what you were saying, linebacker, tight end for sure. Maybe somebody else on the defensive side, like a defensive back, just because you can never have too many.
Yeah, and you can't fake 20-plus sacks in a 2-year span at Notre Dame. I just feel like with Foskey, it's tough for there. Lance, this is an interesting question here, and you've been on some Saints teams that had a plethora of running backs that could be utilized at once. Think about Bush, Pierre Thomas, even Sproles. How do you see the Saints backfield panning out if Kamara gets suspended, with the additions of Kendre Miller and Jamal Williams?
Well, obviously, I'm like all Who Dat fans that will say, hopefully Alvin does not get suspended, right? Let's just start with that, right? Because you want to have all your guys available as many games as possible. So if he doesn't get suspended, then I think we're having a whole different conversation. But let's just say that he is to be suspended, and I don't know how many games, but however many games. We didn't sign Jamal Williams to sit on the sideline. Like, dude has proved over the last several years that he can play. But last year, he really, really proved that he's not just a serviceable backup in this league. Like, he is a capable starting running back, potential Pro Bowl running back. Like, he's got juice, he's got power, and for whatever reason, that joker knows how to find the end zone. Like, so he is, like I said it coming into, before the draft and everything, that I think that this is probably one of the more underrated signings in the whole National Football League, because we needed another running back bad and another running back with juice. Like, I love King Death. I just think, last year we really, really started to see the age play a factor in how he was able to play and then how he's able to stay on the field. So to have a young guy that is a really, really ascending still player is important to me. Kendre Miller, obviously, he's coming off of injury. I think potentially he's going to be in the mix to play because he should be good to go by training camp. Don't sleep on Eno Benjamin. We've got guys that we've got some depth, but Williams is going to be the guy if AK is out. And then the other guys come after that. And I don't know what order it's going to be in, but like I said, we didn't bring Jamal Williams to New Orleans to just be a guy that comes in 4 or 5 or 6 plays during the season. I think actually when Alvin comes back, I think we're going to see a lot of those two on the field together. because that Pony 21 package is tough to stop when you've got two guys that can really go.
Well, and DA said that they didn't want Alvin having as much of a workload as he's been getting. I mean, they needed somebody to take the pressure off of him. And so, look, I think I love Kendre Miller pick. Of course, he's going to have to start off slow a little bit too, but just his mentality of saying he's coming for Kamara's spot. I mean, that's what you want in a running back. I know some people are like, what are you talking about? AK's number one or all this stuff. But look, Jamal Williams, you look at last year, this team had Kamara, they had Mark Ingram, Tony Jones Jr., Abram Smith, Dwayne Washington. Their depth going into this year is leaps and bounds better. And I love the fact that you said Benjamin, because I think a lot of people are sleeping on him. Very versatile. I could see him in the kick return game. I could see him on screens. I just really love the player, and just the fact that, got a raw deal in Arizona, then he had another stop in Houston. I think he's somebody that can really turn a few eyes for some fans.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be sleeping on him after the Thursday night performance he had against the Saints, now that I'm thinking about it. So that's a good point there, John. Keep it with you, John, on this one. This is an interesting one. It's more so different. I don't think this is more so how Dennis Allen handles the draft. Obviously, group collaboration, Jeff Ireland, Mickey Loomis, the whole, brain trust there. But overall, what'd you think of the way they attacked it? And also keeping it on the subject with Bresee and Foskey, what are you expecting out of those two? Do you think it's kind of one of those where maybe both start week one starts, maybe none start? How are you kind of viewing their first two picks?
Well, I'd say this. I think that now Dennis Allen's really starting to put his imprint on this team, and starting to move on from the Sean Payton shadow a little bit. He's getting his guys, he's getting his coaches and stuff. I think when you look at building, he says it all the time, it's a big man's game, right? And so that's where you see 3 of the 4 picks are guys that you invest in the trenches and such. And look, I think when you look at Jeff Ireland, tip the cap to him, just the fact of the work he's done. They have this formula, and they didn't divulge in it. This formula that they use that apparently has not really failed them on as far as the way they make picks and where they evaluate talent. And look, I think DA's worked extremely well with Mickey and Jeff Ireland. They all see eye to eye on things. I think this is pretty much a good way to coast through things. And so, look, I think it's important because I think they came away with at least 3 guys who are going to make huge impacts this season, maybe even a 4th. And I think that's really what you wanted, because you went out, you got your quarterback, you've got your coaches now. You were able to re-sign, or keep guys like Michael Thomas and Jameis Winston, which I think says a lot about this organization. And DA talked about it a lot of times, is we're not trying to sell people this pie in the sky when it comes to New Orleans. We're telling you like it is. Here's how things are. And I think there's a respect level to have when, you go to maybe a New York market or somewhere else where they're like, oh, you get all these things and this lavish stuff, when it's about football. Here's what we're about, all this good stuff. With that being said, I see Bresee making impacts early. I think it's interesting to see what Todd Grantham is going to bring to the table again. I brought him up earlier, but just the way he approaches things is there's no more Ryan Nielsen in the equation. And so one of the things I liked about Isaiah Foskey, and one of the things I also asked Dennis Allen about it, and after they drafted him, is he specifically brought in Todd Grantham for his expertise too on RPOs. Something that we really don't talk a lot about, because the NFL is kind of evolving a little bit with the mobile quarterback, all this stuff. I mean, it has been for years, but that's something specifically Grantham's going to be a little bit more of expertise over. And so Foskey, again, is another guy, disruptive pass rusher. He's pretty balanced, has a few things to do as far as to work on his pass rushing repertoire. But again, he's a solid prospect. He's a guy that has some intensity to him. I loved his reaction after he got drafted. He's a smart player, instinctive player. His coaches raved about him. I mean, this is nothing that feels like this guy can't do. He's ready to come in and, and get to work as soon as it goes. I could see both of these guys being in the rotation week 1 and making impacts in week 1. And for the rest of the year, of course, you got to stay healthy. Bresee has to make sure that he's totally healthy. He said his medical checks are good. Foskey's got to stay healthy. But again, that would be the only way that they don't contribute, is if there's something with the injury bug. But man, it's they're 2 exciting guys. They may not be the sexiest picks, but man, they are the guys that come in here. Blue chip workers are going to get the job done.
Yeah, and Luke, seems like one of our other questions that we got to get to here. Swing it over to Lance on this one. They ask about someone who saw day 1 and day 2. How did the rest of the draft impact the Saints long term? Obviously, that's to come, but what do you think about the picks, Lance, in general, day 3, adding offensive line help, obviously, getting in Jake Haener? We talked about A.T. Perry earlier. Also, you brought up Jordan Howden, the safety as well. What'd you kind of think about that whole and how that may impact the Saints, maybe long term too, if some of these guys pan out?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say long term. Like you really don't know what's going to happen, especially with those guys that get drafted later, because the guys that get drafted later typically aren't your guys that are playing right away. Not saying that they can't. I really, really like the pick of Nick Salvador. Like he's a guy that just, I mean, watch him talk about how he plays or his mentality, or like, I'm not a tackle. I play offensive line. Like I'll play all the positions. Like that's what you want in a player, and it keeps going back to this versatility thing. Like he fits the mold of that, a guy that can play tackle, guard, or center on either side. And he's just like, plug me in and I'll play. Like those are the types of guys that you want to have. And the funny thing, like this goes back to the last question a little bit, but we really get so spoiled with the success that we've had drafting players in this organization over the last almost 10 years now, even longer, really, that a lot of people, me included, get so honed in and focused on the one or two higher picks that don't pan out that it's like, we don't trust them anymore. Like we can't, like, oh, the Davenport didn't work out. Like, what are we going to do? But then you think back of all of the guys that we've drafted that have been great for us, not just good players, not just day one starters, but pro bowlers, all pro caliber players that have been successful and been successful for a number of years. So I think we've got to continue to, or put our trust back into the organization as far as how they draft, because guess what? The same people are in those offices that are making a lot of those decisions. And of course, Dennis Allen and Mickey, and those guys are going to be on the same page because they've been together for so long. They've been through this together, maybe not with DA as the head coach, but they've been in these meetings. It's a continuity of what they've done in the past. And I would expect, these guys from this draft class to be successful like the several guys from the last several classes as well.
Yeah. And you know what? I figured at this point, last 5 minutes before we wrap things up, something that probably Saints fans are thinking of anyway, but I think it's always a fun time to bring it up and discuss. Did this draft move the needle enough, did you guys think? And I'm not saying it takes this team from potential NFC South contender to Super Bowl contender, but do you guys think they brought in enough playmakers that we can say as of now we feel a lot more confident about the Saints today than maybe we did a week ago? Lance, we'll start with you and then swing it over to John.
Yes, I absolutely do, just because specific voids were filled. Now, obviously, the jury's still out. We don't know if these guys are going to come in and be what we expect them to be, but with glaring holes, obviously, on the front of the defensive line and other positions, we added some depth at receiver and defensive back, as well as offensive line. I absolutely think we should be the surefire NFC South favorite. And then who knows what can happen from there. I mean, obviously, if you get into the tournament, anything can happen. The team that shows up and plays better that day, not the better team. Like people a lot of times think that, like, oh, they're better, they're going to win. Like, nah, they might be the better team on paper. They might be the better team coming into that specific game, but the team who plays better on that given Sunday. And I truly feel like it's like that, not just in the playoffs, but in the NFL nowadays. Like it is truly any given Sunday. So whoever shows up and plays better on that day is usually the team that's victorious.
Short answer is yes, because I know you wanted to talk on you undrafted guys right quick, but yeah, absolutely. They came away with everything. Just upgrading the quarterback position. That's everything, right? I mean, there's just so many. And again, if they get more, I'm a little bit concerned at the linebacker spot. And again, just because they need some other guys. And, that was one spot I thought they might address in the draft and stuff. But that's the only spot that I'm really concerned about at this moment, just because you don't want any drop off from that play. But look, they've got all the pieces here to at least win the division. And like Lance said, just get in. And that's all that matters. Even if they get in a wild card, NFC is still not that strong. I know people have been making some moves, but it's still not that strong. So if the Saints can't come up with at least a wild card with this team, this roster, I don't know.
Yeah, and we mentioned it. They added some defensive firepower in this draft, and those kids start making plays. You go into the playoffs with a defense that's capable of changing things up. Who knows? But yeah, John, you mentioned it. So before we go, figure I have to ask you. Last year, we're talking about undrafted guys who could maybe make the roster. You didn't go for Rashid Shaheed because we weren't sure, obviously, in yourself. You went for Lewis Kidd, and some people might have been like, who? And then, lo and behold, Lewis Kidd makes the roster, got a couple snaps this season too. who you looking at in the undrafted class, even if it's just one guy that maybe you're excited to see in camp?
Put me on the spot, but I got 4 guys for you, and the one that I'll tell you prevail for me is Joel Wilson from Central Michigan, the tight end. Just because watching his film, there's just a lot of creativity that Central Michigan ran up there. Whether it's tight end screens, throwback screens, all these things. This guy is pretty exciting to watch. 6'4", he's somebody that can make some contested catches. He's just exciting to watch for me. So that's my first one. Mark Evans from University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. Teron Armstead came from there. It's a guy to watch. Offensive line, Mahler, real good hand placement. That's one that I'd keep an eye on. Shaq Davis from South Carolina State, wide receiver. Go watch this guy. I know it's HBCU. I'm just worried. I'm not worried, but I'm interested to see what he does against some more physical corners like the Saints have. But he's a guy that, you look at A.T. Perry, but just the contested catches. This guy's really excited to watch. And the last thing would be Malik Flowers from Montana. In that FCS conference, they got Rashid Shaheed from there last year, and they got Malik Flowers this year. He's going to be a pretty exciting one to watch in the return game. About 2 inches taller than Rashid and about 10, 15 pounds heavier.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. If you get him in the return game, maybe Rashid gets to focus a little bit more on receiver too. Who knows? We'll see how that shapes out. Before we bounce, so Lance, let people know what you got coming up this week for Boo Crew Media. I know you got something real special cooking.
Yeah, for sure. Tomorrow will be my first fan Q&A session. Everybody's asking me, like, who are you going to have on? Who are you going to have on? I'm like, what's the first one? So I got to try to do something big. So I tapped to my connection here in San Diego, and I said, hey, number 9, I'm doing this Q&A. I would love for you to jump on and answer some questions with me from fans and the likes. And he said, absolutely, I got you. So we are still really good teammates and we communicate well. So I feel like tomorrow will be an awesome show. It's going to be 11:30 Central time, and it's going to be live. It's going to be a live show like this one, and hopefully people can tap in. I know it's kind of awkward time because it's on a Tuesday semi-afternoon, but we got to make time for whenever Drew Brees has time. So that's when we're going to get it going, and hopefully people can tap in as well.
Yeah, that's going to be some exciting stuff. So make sure if you guys have your questions, bring them then for Lance and Drew. That's going to do it for us. On behalf of John, Lance, and myself, I want to thank you all for leaving your questions, for tuning in, and hopefully this leads to a very successful Saints 2023 season. And make sure, as always, guys, subscribe to the Boo Crew Media page so you don't miss out on new content like what Lance has coming up on Tuesday. But that's going to do it for us. Everyone have a good night. Stay tuned for more content from the Boo Crew Media crew.